Hey guys, it's Katu. It's been almost a year since the release of AC6, but one topic always seems to pop up regardless of the game's age. Pre-nerfed Balteus versus nerfed Balteus. While data miners have said that they nerfed the tracking of Balteus' missiles, other, let's just say professionals, claim that Balteus is now less aggressive, the projectile speeds of the bazooka and the missiles are slower, animation speeds are slower, and in general, Balteus moves slower. Despite these claims, there's absolutely near zero proof that any of these things exist, besides, well, I feel it that way, so it must be true. There's no attempts to prove it by dissecting how the AI works, neither an attempt to understand input reading, despite it being FromSoft's most commonly used method to design bosses. So I'm here to at least try, not 100% prove, as I do not dig into the files, but try my best to go through everything to see what is true and what is not. On the left will be footage from Regulation 1.01, the base game on release, and on the right will be footage from Regulation 1.02, which is where they nerf the bosses and buff some weapons. I will not be using Regulation 1.03 and higher, as that is the patch where FromSoft altered the way weight affects your speed and gives a significant buff to lower weight ACs. In particular, the full Noct frame with Alula's goes 370 in 103 compared to 350 in 102. Also, due to my computer being extremely old, there are some inconsistencies with Ayer's dialogue as well as the soundtrack. If that bothers you, watch with sound off. Anyway, let's begin. The first point to start with is missile projectile speed. The attack used will be the opening barrage and timing it from when the loading screen ends until the first missile hits us.
Main system, reactivating combat mode. I've looked into... Main system, reactivating combat mode.
As you can see, in both cases, the timers are identical, with some small, minuscule difference in Regulation 1.01 for the first clip. After testing getting hit by the opening barrage, I've concluded that the missiles are all very inaccurate anyway, as a full barrage of that would easily kill a stationary AC, and yet Balteus will still miss some missiles. Now let's move on to the bazooka. The timer will start when the projectile leaves the barrel, and end when it hits my AC. To test and see if projectile speed is different, I will be at varying ranges for both regulations. With the bazooka, it's clear that Regulation 1.01 bazooka projectile does in fact travel faster. However, the difference is less than a second for 20 meters of range difference, clocking in at 0.08 seconds. While realistically you're not always going to be 20 meters away from Balteus between the patches, the bazooka fired at 200 meters still catches the player in less than a second. That speed matters less and less as you get closer to Balteus, obviously, as the closer you are, the less likely you will to dodge a bullet that hits you in less than half a second. In my opinion, this nerf doesn't do anything to change the way the bazooka interacts with the player. With the projectiles done, we're now going to see if Balteus travels shorter or slower after its nerf, as, for some reason, many people tie that as the reason you can catch up to Balteus now, as opposed to the weight or speed changes that affected 1.03. We're going to be using the two different long, overt boosts that Balteus uses during its fight, with the test seeing if Balteus lands any shorter than expected and any slower.
I've looked into the aircraft. It's an autonomous PCA aircraft. Balteus. I've looked into the aircraft. It's an autonomous PCA aircraft. Balteus. You'll have to let the pulse arc to inflict meaningful damage.
For both overt boosts, there isn't a noticeable difference in the distance created, and Balteus lands at its location at pretty much the same time. Therefore, we can safely conclude that the speed and distance was unaffected. Lastly, for speed, we're going to be doing animation speeds. This argument mainly revolves around the fact that Balteus' flame swords are now slower, which makes them easier to dodge. We will not need a timer for this, as the following examples are pretty self-explanatory. Regardless of regulation, the hits all register at the same time for the first clip, and dodging is pretty effortless in the third clip. This means that the flame swords are untouched despite what people say or believe. Now to address the final thing that data miners have posted, the missile tracking nerf. This is the real change that people talk about the most, and the results of the nerf are varying depending on what distance you are from Balteus. We're going to be testing a few things for this one in particular. 1. How many missiles from the opening barrage hits us if we freefall? 2. How many missiles from the opening barrage hits us if we're at a distance going sideways? 3. How many missiles from the opening barrage can hit us if we're underneath Balteus? Lastly, how many missiles will realistically hit us whenever we are near Balteus and moving? On to freefalling.
Main system, reactivating combat mode. Main system, reactivating combat mode. I've looked into the enemy craft.
Now I will admit, freefalling with Alulas is a terrible idea, as it has one of the worst vertical climbs in the game. But regardless of the execution, it becomes clear that in Regulation 1.01, more missiles will hit you in comparison to Regulation 1.02. However, the amount of missiles hitting you only really goes up by 2 or 3 missiles, at which point the chip damage adds up over a longer duration of a fight. But that only really comes with being a rookie to AC6, as most players do not know aggression the first time they fight Balteus. Moving on to the next point, sideways at a distance.
Main system, reactivating combat mode. I've looked into the enemy. Main system, reactivating combat mode. I've looked into the enemy.
This is where the real difference shows between the two regulations. It's day and night difference between the two. In 1.01, you're always going to get staggered going sideways, but in 1.02, the tracking nerf will always let you survive the initial ACS overload. On to the next, moving underneath Balteus.
Main system, reactivating combat mode. Main system, reactivating combat mode.
This hasn't changed at all, and regardless of regulation, hiding underneath Balteus in the opening avoids all the missiles if you know the exact spot. Lastly, missiles while being near Balteus. As you can see, while you do take more missile damage depending on the attack used, it really does not make a difference to someone who already knows Armored Core as a game, let alone Balteus at this point. If you're dragging on your fight long enough for the missile chip damage to matter, you will also most likely have run out of ammunition to fight Balteus, which is what a lot of rookie players do while fighting this for the first time. Plenty of new players stay at a long distance fighting Balteus, but anyone who's done the fight enough or seen guides will know the key is to stick up the Balteus to avoid ricochets and to render half of its attacks useless. My conclusion for the supposed nerfs is that it does not matter to you if you're a skilled player, while it absolutely removes game overs for newcomers due to the sheer missile stagger. Now, onto my actual theory as to why people are saying things like, Balteus is less aggressive, or Balteus is easier, etc. As the game's knowledge has grown and people experiment with stuff, the people saying Balteus is easy are mostly the veterans of the game. What these veterans don't realize is that build differences, playstyles, and input reading from the boss literally changes how a fight will turn out. For most people, their starting AC would comprise of something like the Pulse Blade, alongside a handheld weapon, and probably 2 missiles. Balteus will naturally be more aggressive and use its bazookas more because it's designed to respond to player inputs and the player's weapons. If you can read and dissect patterns, you'll know that Balteus innately always does a backwards QB into a bazooka if you ever attempt to melee it. However, seeing as how the player base's knowledge has evolved over time, alongside videos being posted, one of the things that players now do is unlock Weapon Bay early, slap on 2 handheld weapons, and bay out their Pulse Blade or Laser Blade. It's not just that though, but in general, dual trigger handhelds are more commonly seen in gameplay. If I must give an example, for both PvE and PvP, dual Ransetsu RFs while hovering around and kiting? Or what about dual handguns, either Vientos, Ducats, or whatever else, bait up with a melee weapon, such as the Pal Bunker, the Pulse Blade, or the Laser Slicer? People just are not aware that input reading is a big deal when approaching these bosses. And it's fine. But please do not spread misinformation about the boss's behavior changing, when in reality, the boss is scripted to do things based on the player's approach. Balteus' nerf is not a big deal for skilled players, and causes less headache game overs for newer players of the series, which, again, is fine. Stop gatekeeping the fight and sucking the fun out from people without doing the research. It's atrocious to look at. This is where I will end this video, and most likely will be my only in-depth look at the boss nerfs.